In a changing world, shouldn't you change your money habits? Like signing up your business for remote online payments so you can start getting paid digitally 24/7. Apply online at nedbank.co.za/MPS. Let's change money habits.
Well, good morning everyone, and welcome to the first of many Nedbank webinars that we'll be hosting around the key payment topics like e-commerce, payment acceptance, and digital and mobile payments. My name is Mpho Sadiki, and I'm the executive for card and payments acceptance at Nedbank. In this morning's sessions, we have lined up a very exciting panel of experts in the field of e-commerce, and by this I'm talking about guys like Gabriel Swanepoel, Hannes Kriel, who will take us through what does it take to go online. E-commerce adoption by SMEs in South Africa is expected to double, if not triple, over the next 3 years. Some key research has predicted that e-commerce will account for about 45% of SME retail volume by 2025. And this is primarily driven by the ever-increasing adoption of digital payments, whether it be online or mobile, by consumers. With this in mind, and the advent of COVID and what it has done to SMEs and businesses all over, I'm sure yourself as business leaders are asking yourself these questions. How do I take my business online? What do I need to do to start up my e-commerce store? And what precautions, if any, do I need to take? And what else do I need to get going? Well, this morning we hope that we're going to cover some of those key topics with our key panel of experts. Hopefully, when you leave this session, you will be more confident to move your business online. Before I introduce the panel in detail, let me first cover some of the key logistics about this session. So you will note that we are on Microsoft Teams. So on the top left-hand corner, you can raise questions as the speakers are speaking, and we will take those questions during the session as the speakers finish with their presentations, and also at the end of the session in a panel-type Q&A. For any technical issues, please do press the refresh button, and then you will catch up back with the presentations. Okay? So I'm going to move then immediately, without any further ado, to introduce our first panel leader, which is Gabriel Swanepoel. So Gabriel is a senior vice president at MasterCard, responsible for innovation, product development, and commercialization of digital products. He's been involved in new business development and innovation initiatives in the payments industry for over 20 years. So he's a seasoned professional when it comes to payments innovation and digital payments. Prior to joining MasterCard, Gabriel was a new business and innovation manager at Verifone Africa, another one of the payments ecosystem players, where he oversaw all new product and business development initiatives in South Africa. Gabriel's focus on innovation is coupled with an entrepreneurial approach and has brought a lot of success in all the engagements that he's been involved in, whether it be in machine-to-machine communication or X-Link communications as one of those things. So with Gabriel, I'm going to hand over to you. I'm sure you've got a lot to share to the team and the listeners out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mpho. Much appreciated, and good morning, everybody. It's a privilege to be here. Thank you for thinking of us and including us in this webinar. E-commerce certainly is a very hot topic in 2020. We've seen so many changes so far this year that has affected us. Some, that we look to with trepidation, but there's so much momentum now that is building within the broader commerce space. And what we hope to do today is to show you a little bit what we're thinking of in terms of e-commerce, and not just the evolution of e-commerce, but how that ultimately brings value to your businesses, and how that value that you bring affect the way that the consumers behave, and ultimately help us to rebuild and get back to normalization in a post-COVID world. So we've prepared a little video that we'd like to show you to get things going. So if we can cue that, that'll be great.
At MasterCard, we've seen COVID-19 propel an accelerated shift to digital payments. Our research is showing a massive and sudden move away from cash and a steep increase in e-commerce. MasterCard Digital Enablement Service turns card numbers into tokens that become useless to fraudsters and eliminates the frustration of manually updating your card information. Today, we are live with over 2,600 issuers around the world. We speed up your checkout through our click-to-pay technology. The one-click, password-free checkout experience also uses MasterCard tokenization. More than 10,000 U.S. merchants have been enabled for click-to-pay. And we've designed digital products from the ground up. Our digital-first approach lets cardholders immediately use their digital card with a mobile device. A physical card is optional in many cases. MasterCard has powered the accelerated shift to digital payments, and we continue to innovate with vision and purpose to support our partners and consumers on their journey to a digital future.
So things have certainly changed, and the tools that we leverage have also changed in the way that we interact, not just with each other, but the way that we interact with businesses and the way that we gather information. And the interesting thing is that from a South African perspective, just 15 years ago, total retail sales on e-commerce was at around the 2 billion rand mark. And this year, it's published that we might get as high as 14 billion rand in total online retail sales. And that is across the board, right? It doesn't matter whether it's prescription or subscription services that we're thinking of, whether, we are looking at a new way of collection in a COVID world where we order online and we go pick up on the curbside. It is a world that just sees a massive increase in e-commerce. And in terms of that, the consumer behavior is changing. And this consumer behavior is now changing in a world where in 2020, global digital e-commerce is expected to reach as high as $6 trillion. The interesting thing, however, is that the contribution from the mobile world is set to be as high as 40%. And that shows the importance of the technology and the confluence of technology that affects the way that we think about the behavior. Now, if we think about 2020 and the impact that COVID has had on the world, it is not necessarily COVID that has, introduced e-commerce or that is making this topical today, but it certainly has accelerated it. And I think what we need to be cognizant of is that e-commerce and digital and digitization and the technologies that we apply within this world affects in a very profound way the way that we interact with each other. But what it also does is that it allows us to explore business models and approaches that we've never considered before. So in a very real way, the fundamentals around the way that we interact from a business perspective, but also the way that we interact with each other is changing. The way that we share information is changing. And so it is important to note that if we don't recognize this confluence between the way that we interact with each other and the impact that the technologies has on it, we might end up in a very unfortunate position. So trend-wise, what we're talking about then is we have to think a little bit about what are these emerging technologies that shape the way that we are interacting with each other and the way that it is affecting us, that there's a shift in behavior, and how that shift in behavior then ultimately translates into the retail space or into the commercial space. And I think that from a payment perspective, it's really about a platform play, right? It's in the payment space, it's a little bit about how do we think as business owners where our consumers are, and then making sure that whichever channels our consumers utilize, that we are able to get to them and that we are able to communicate with them in an efficient manner, and that we allow frictionless engagement in the way that we facilitate checkout processes, or the way that we make available channels, or the way that we make available follow-up from a customer support perspective. And the reality is that within this changing environment, it affects every single business out there. And within those, there's a couple of key factors with the combination of all of these different technologies that is having a profound effect in the way that we do commerce. So the need to go digital is driven by 5 factors, but I think what is important is maybe to highlight an example that we've seen, which is just absolutely fascinating in the way that technology comes together. So back in 2017, Deloitte's called a phrase called mobility as a service. And the way that mobility as a service was described, it was thought of as its Netflix for transportation. And the idea behind it that, initially businesses like Uber started very much within the consumer space in terms of delivery, but very quickly that morphed and it moved over into the food delivery space and now also into the freight business. And, within that environment, what happened is that the traditional friction that was there in the last mile. So, think back in the days where you could online order something, but, it took weeks to arrive. And with the introduction with mobility as a service and the ability to look at how to use artificial intelligence and how to use machine learning to optimize routes for delivery and how to think through, where warehouses should be for stock delivery, which Amazon has done that well. What did that do in terms of removing the friction in terms of delivery, but ultimately from a consumer perspective, giving and allowing for that instant gratification, which is so key to the delivery of goods and services today. And the interesting takeaway from this was that it is set to exponentially grow and change the way that we interact with each other. In a COVID world, what this has done is it's removed the friction to such an extent that if you think about the experience that you have today in terms of online shopping, we are looking, even in South Africa, at next day delivery or within a couple of days delivery. We're not quite where the United States are in terms of same day, but that is certainly coming to the fore. And as this technology increases, we need to be cognizant of what are the factors that drive this. For us, we know that if we look at those first three things around competition, customer expectations, and the financial pressures, that those are the types of trends that drove COVID. And from a competition perspective, the point to recognize there is that consumers no longer have the traditional barriers in terms of interacting with your competition in order to effect a sale. Online access and the way that products can be researched and the way that people can interact in a secure and in a safe manner across different platforms allow them to reach out for the best price. Instant gratification in the way that the goods are delivered is par for the course. And so when we think about how we differentiate, it's really key to understand with a razor-sharp focus what are the specific value proposition that is delivered from a product point of view. And then at the back of that, to be able to adapt that to that particular customer expectations. So an example of this would be what we're seeing now with the emergence of marketplaces, where in places like China and in India, Alibaba with the launch of Alipay has done really well in putting out marketplaces that has a super app approach where people can consume many different services out of the single app platform. But that has not really worked in the West. And so we need to understand what are the local nuances in the environment that we operate in and how customers want to interact with each other. And so when we think about these factors then, and we think about this two-sided platform where we're thinking of the consumer on the one end and that consumer need, and we also think as businesses how we address the requirements within this changing environment, there's really three things that we need to just keep in the back of our mind when we think about our own digital journey in terms of digitization and also then, ultimately living within the e-commerce space. And I think firstly it's just thinking and having that consumer view in mind that the friction can be removed and it should be removed, and that ultimately a customer wants what they want, when they want and where they want it. And so we need to think about digital commerce or e-commerce not simply just being the web browser anymore, but have it expanded across most of the channels that is available to us today. And that is quite profound, right? In a COVID world, we don't any longer necessarily want to dip our cards and interact with a point of sale device to type in our PIN or wear plastic gloves at the point of sale. We want to be able to scan a QR code or we want to be able to just tap our card and walk away. We want to be able to access information from our mobile handsets. And we still very much want to interact within the browser environment in the way that we're thinking about that. Then it's important to recognize that the way that we do the payment processing is just one enabler, right? It is an enablement for us to do that exchange of value and to be able to do that exchange of value across all of the channels. But then also from a back-end perspective to make sure that the recon and settlements are in place. And I know that from a Nedbank perspective and later from a security point of view, Hannes and Andrew is gonna touch on this as well. And so to get back to our story in terms of the consumer then, that's all good. We understand that it's a platform and we understand that the technologies are changing and we know that within this environment there's different channels that the consumers interact with each other and also that some of the friction in the traditional online space has been removed. But what does that really mean from a consumer perspective? And the interesting thing is in South Africa, and I think this is globally, everywhere, people are more concerned with hygiene. People want to do more contactless payments. We are suddenly much more circumspect in thinking about the realities of online payment. And so, for example, 83% are comfortable to have a credential on file. And this is for everything from, watching Netflix online to perhaps, storing your credentials with your favorite online e-tailer so that, the checkout process is much more frictionless and easier to and easier to access and check out for future checkout points. And I think the understanding at the back of this, if we look at it, is really then from a consumer perspective could be summarized by three things that we need to think about from a business perspective. From a South African market perspective, it's really just thinking about what has really at a fundamental level changed in the way that we are interacting. And I think from a behavior perspective, there's a couple of things that we need to remember. One is that the grocery and the retailers are still dominant. People still need to eat, and that carries on. Life carries on. Bills still need to be paid, and the consumer patterns have changed. And the consumer patterns have changed at the back of what we've talked about now. In a way, what you could say is that the friction that consumers experienced traditionally pre-COVID is now less than the friction at the physical checkout location. And I can say that because I can look at the checkout process, especially when a card is on file, and I know that something is going to have a next day delivery, and I compare that with bricks and mortar shopping today. So I have to make sure that I'm wearing my mask. I have to be comfortable that I might wait in a queue for 10 minutes outside the shop before I'm allowed to enter. I have to make sure that when I'm inside the store, I have to keep a 2-meter distance. When I don't really want to interact with that PIN pad, so I hope that when I do check out at the point of sale that I'm able to dip a card. I'm not necessarily that keen to handle cash. And so suddenly when we think about those behaviors from a consumer perspective, if I can access that same goods and services either online or through a mobile app, and I'm able to have it delivered at my house, or I'm able to pick it up on the curbside, then that makes a lot of sense to me. And so I think it's understanding the behaviors and the reason behind those behaviors that is affecting the way that we should think about payments in general and how that checkout works. So I think that from a merchant perspective, if we think about it, then what should be top of mind? Well, I think an online presence is absolutely key. In whichever way or form it comes. Mobile checkout is absolutely key. We know that 54% of South African internet access comes from mobile handsets. We know that it is important at the point of sale to not physically interact. So where we can have a no-touch checkout, that would be preferable. Contactless payments is important. I'll share a little bit of stats on that just now. And then QR payment, which we've seen a massive rise in South Africa since the introduction of COVID, with the likes of Pick and Pay and ShopRite, also deploying QR codes at their point of sale as a checkout mechanism. So the digitization, in a nutshell, is not just, what we would traditionally think about as, the browser checkout environment. It also is everything where technology is embedded in a combination of modules to come up with a solution that is fit for purpose to meet your customer demand and to give you as a business the broadest possible reach to reach your broadest possible audience. So if we look at consumer impact, so the consumer impact has been interesting in South Africa. We've listed some of the highlights of the different categories which is based on a report that McKinsey did. And I think that what's interesting here is that groceries have obviously not been that impacted, and that we're seeing an increase in spend in very interesting categories that we didn't necessarily anticipate. So if we think about online services and the spend that we've had within the gaming world, for example, the trend from a consumer point of view is that consumers are much more interested in signing up for services that allows for entertainment at home due to the fact that you're not allowed to travel. And what's also interesting in terms of the impact is the shift from e-commerce in many categories or to e-commerce from in-store sales as COVID hit. And the slide in front of you basically just shows the likelihood and the impact that has been seen from where people traditionally operated within the bricks and mortar space and is now open to at least make the decision and the shift to online commerce. The takeaway here obviously is that, there's no merchant category really that gets left behind. It's important to note that regardless of the type of service or the type of product that you sell, due to this changing environment that we operate in, changes can be made, and those changes can, in a very real way, affect the reach that you have in getting to your consumer base. So from just a little bit of statistics on the contactless side to wrap up, we've seen globally so far 40% growth in contactless payments globally in Q1 in 2020, which has just been staggering. And in South Africa, it means that we've seen 10 times the number of contactless payments as a proportion of all face-to-face payments in the country. And we also see that contactless payments are preferred in many of those recurring daily type of use cases that we do. 89% for groceries, 60% in pharma, 15% in fast food. And I think that is ultimately causing or changing the trends in such a way that it is here to stay. I think that what we'll see in the coming months is that more people are going to use contactless payments in SA. And what is important, therefore, is that as we've talked a little bit about this changing consumer behavior, is to make sure that from a contactless payment perspective, the point of sales face towards the customers, that it is easy and it is accessible, that it is, from a social distancing perspective, positioned in the right way. And I think that lastly, the takeaway here is that contactless is here to stay, and there's confidence in the technology as a whole. So with that, I thank you. Thank you very much for the time again, Mpo, and I look forward to participate further.
Thank you, Gabriel. I think that was a very insightful presentation, and hopefully it really has given people some insights. I just picked up one question that I wanted to just pose to you, and I think it was in slide 9 of the presentation where you spoke about the changing consumer dynamics that are driving this digital change. I think the one question that has come through in mind is that how do, as merchants, do they take advantage of this changing dynamic that is changing at such a fast, rapid pace?
I think, Mpo, that's a great question, and I think that we've seen the kind of growth, right? That in the last 6 months, post-COVID, the consumer behavior shifted. So let me give you some examples. Globally, PayPal I think it was in April and May, they've added 7.4 million new accounts globally. In South Africa, since COVID lockdown, so since the last week in March, up until now, PayFast have added 15,000 additional accounts as a payment services provider for online commerce. And lastly, Mr. Price Group saw a 90% increase in online sales following lockdown. Now, with those types of things, it means that the consumer behavior has fundamentally shifted or has accelerated in the online space. So from a merchant perspective, it's no longer an optional conversation on whether you need an online presence and be able to engage. So it's important that we as partners between Nedbank and MasterCard and the product suites that we put out into the market, that we equip the merchants with the right type of tools, which, we're going to talk about a little bit later. And just realize that from a merchant perspective, it really isn't that complex. The partnerships and the service providers within that space is available to enable you. And once you're online, it just increases that reach and the ability to expand your business.
Cool. So the time to act is now.
Time to act is now.
Okay. Thank you, Gabriel. So we're going to quickly move on to our next panel speaker, and that panel speaker is Hannes Kriel. So Hannes Kriel is a product manager within the Nedbank card and payments acceptance space, and he's responsible for, designing these complex e-commerce products and also simplifying them for our merchants. Hannes has been with Nedbank for over 15 years, primarily in the payments acceptance space, and spending both times in issuing and also within the acceptance space of card and payments. He's passionate about technology and using technology as a value add to effectively drive business change and business growth. So, Hannes, I'm going to hand over to you to run through your part of the presentation and also share some of your key insights around e-commerce payments.
Thank you, Mpho. And hi, everybody. It's actually nice to be out of home for a bit and be in the office. It feels like Nedbank has let us out. So thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. I'm going to touch a bit on what Gabriel has said, but to try and be a bit more practical, I'm going to look at what's a journey that a small business needs to take to get online. And there are a multitude of options out there as we sit right now. The easiest one is to do Facebook, to go on Facebook and create a marketplace or to lodge your business on Facebook. But I'm not going to go into that type of detail because that's a whole ecosystem and it's got its own bits and pieces and its own complexities. So I'm just going to go step by step and try and be a bit more practical, but most of this information is available online. So the first step that you want to do if you don't have an online presence is you would need to register your domain. And a domain is basically like Google or Facebook, that's the domain name. So if you don't know what a domain name is, please go and Google it, but you have to register your domain. And some tips in terms of registering your domain. First things first, keep it short. Don't have a long name that's going to take people ages to type. Try and keep it simple, keep it short. And like I said, make it easy to type for people. You don't want people to... it also needs to be memorable. I've found many a times where I've driven and you see a URL on the side of a truck somewhere and you kind of go, ooh, I need to remember that. And by the time you get home, you've forgotten completely. So that's one of the challenges that I face personally in trying to remember URLs. And then pick the right extension. These days you've got a whole host of extensions, and the extension is a bit behind the dot. So in South Africa it always used to be .co.za. The US tends to embrace .com. But these days there are a lot of new extensions out there. .tv, .biz, you name it. There's plenty of them. So in any domain registration site that you're going to, you will find the options that you can use. And choose the right one. If you're a non-profit organization, generally it would be .org.za in South Africa. So those are the types of things that you need to look at. And then the next step is, after you've chosen what your name is, check that it isn't trademarked. Again, simple Google search. Even at Nedbank, when we've chosen new products, one of the things that we always do go through when we choose a product name is to go and check the trademark registers. So, and the easiest way to do that is to do a Google search. So once you've got all of that, then you are ready to register. So next steps is, if it hasn't been trademarked, then you also need to check whether it has been registered. If somebody else, they might not have trademarked the name, but they might have registered the domain. And most domain registration sites will also tell you about the options and will tell you whether that domain name has been taken. And then you register, and it's simple as that. So with domain registration, normally the shortest period that you can register a domain for is about a year. After that, but you can go up to 5 years. And a domain registration is like a virtual home or a lease that you are taking. You don't own it permanently. You are just leasing that piece of domain for the period that you are hosting your website online. Next steps, plan your website. And with planning your website, we mean, I'll go into the details. You have to plan and research and decide what your website is going to be. So are you only going to be a content website where you are marketing yourself without the ability to do anything other than just marketing your goods? And I think in the pre-COVID, that was probably more of an option. I think these days, lots more clients need to be able to sell online or at least gather sales. So your other option is whether it's going to be lead generation only. So people will be able to see your goods, but then say, well, contact me and fill in their details and you will get back to them to sell to them. But what we're ultimately here to talk about is e-commerce. And e-commerce is basically saying we are selling goods online, or services for that matter. So, and the sales of goods and services online is what we term e-commerce. Okay. So the next step after you've decided what you're going to do is to start figuring out how you are going to build this website. And again, there are multiple options. And it depends on how deep your pocket is, in essence. So this is what I'm saying, pick a designer. So you get DIY website builders. These are fairly simple type of service providers that offer you templates and you basically, and pictures and everything, and you basically just fill in some content. Then the other ones that do require a bit more skill, but you don't have to be that skilled to be able to do it, is use sites like WordPress. They offer templates as well, but you will be using your own pictures, you will be writing your own content and those types of things. You also have cloud solutions. So all of the cloud providers out there, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft Azure, offers you some type of storage, online storage. They normally offer you domain registration services, and they basically take the whole solution for you. So as a non-developer, I've managed to build a website using Amazon Web Services with WordPress plugins, and that worked fairly easily. I managed to do that within a day. That was only a content-only website, not a sales website with e-commerce. And your other option then after that is to go to professional website designers, but this obviously comes with a bit of a cost. So with a lot of the DIY website builders, WordPress, and to a certain extent some of the cloud solutions with pre-hosted stuff, you will be a bit more secure. Andrew is going to take us into some more security a bit later on. But security concerns will probably be more prevalent with professional website designers. Next step after that is content. So you've decided what you're going to do, you've picked what you're going to build, you've got a domain ready to go, now you need content. I would say the first things that you have to do, and you kind of have to think of your own online experiences in terms of how you shop. You need to say who you are, explain who you are, what's your shop, build some type of rapport with the customer. You don't have a physical presence, so this is the presence that you have. So this is what the customer is going to experience when they see you. And you have to build trust. Most of the people will not buy from a website that looks unprofessional and that looks homemade. So tell the story, tell them who you are, what your background is, and create some trust. Use images. Don't just be heavy on text. Use images. There are lots of free stock images available, but I would probably recommend that you use images that are relevant to what you are doing and use your own images if you can. Furthermore, consistent use of colors, logos, fonts, and layouts. Just be consistent in your look and feel. That will also create trust and give some form of professionality in terms of your website content. And ensure that it is mobile friendly. Gabriel touched on it briefly in terms of that there's a lot of content being consumed on mobile devices. But these days, if you're not mobile friendly, most people tend to build websites on a desktop and see it on a desktop when they're building it. They don't often get the opportunity to view it on a mobile device. After that, it's all great and well. You've built your website, you are now ready to sell. But if you build it, it doesn't mean that they will come. So you need to get out there. And one of the first things that you will do is something that everybody calls SEO, which stands for Search Engine Optimization. So in other words, people need to be able to find you. So search engine optimization, I'm not going into the details. This is not my area of speciality. But there's a lot of information around search engine optimization. Image optimization is something else that you can go and research. This is so that if your images are optimized in a certain way, the search engines will be more friendly in terms of finding your products. Online directories is another way of where you can host your content. And then there's marketplaces as well. A marketplace is a bit more of a complicated setup. Takealot operates as a marketplace in South Africa, and so does Amazon. As a marketplace, basically, you can publish your goods or your inventory on the website, and they will sell it on your behalf. It is an expensive mechanism of doing it, but it is an easy and short way of getting your products out there. Then the other option is Google AdWords to assist with advertising, but that's also can become quite expensive. And again, this is not my area of expertise, but there's a lot of online content available about these options. Then that spoke more around, and it was a fairly quick tour of what a website will look like and what you would do to get people to your website. And there's a lot more detail. You can go and post on social media to get your message out there. But just talking briefly around e-commerce and some of the things, and this is normally where we as a bank play, and we only play a small portion of e-commerce. And excuse the busyness of this slide. This is a typical strategic slide. But if we go and look at what e-commerce consists of, we've got what we would call a user interface, which is your website. Generally, then there's inventory. You don't want to be posting goods for sale if you don't have them in stock. So you need some type of inventory management system. And at the bottom there, we've put down some brands, which is not at all exhaustive, but it is a list of products out there where that offers these types of services. Back on the inventory management is around being able to show how much stock you have. In terms of user experiences, you don't want to be able to sell stuff, tell the client, sorry, I don't have any of this in stock, and then have to refund them. Then the next step after inventory is a shopping cart, which is quite important to manage your checkout process. And then from the shopping cart, you go into the checkout and the payment system, and this is really where we play. And the companies that we deal with in this space and the services that we as Nedbank offer is in the payment space. And that's obviously important. If you're selling goods, you want to be paid. And we call these companies payment gateways, and we partner with a multitude of them in South Africa. So we also offer our own products. So this is the guts of the e-commerce system, is to be able to pay. And this is also where most of the risk lies in managing it. So this process needs to be smooth, because if you have drop-off at this point in time, you've done all the hard work to get the sale, and then the client drops off when he needs to pay. So this needs to be, the client needs to feel safe when he's paying, and it needs to look good. And then one of the things that most people tend to forget about is the challenges of fulfillment on your orders. The challenge here is I think it's become a bit more easy in South Africa. Courier companies are offering specific services for e-commerce, and with COVID, we've seen an explosion in some of that. But traditionally, it was quite difficult if you're running a chili sauce business from your home and you want to sell your goods online. It's all great and well. You can get your goods online, you can sell it, you can get payment for it, but now you need to get it to the client. And that's where, as Gabriel was saying, the US has gotten quite far ahead of us in terms of being able to fulfill on those orders, but South Africa is catching up. And that's the end of my bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannes. I think your presentation also was quite insightful, and I'm particularly excited about your last slide where you've tried to simplify, I guess, the key elements that drive the journey of becoming online ready, if you want to call it that, or having your e-commerce store up and running. And it's quite important that you highlighted the point around courier, which is always that last mile hurdle that fails many e-commerce stores, as you used your example of the chili sauce, in that it's very easy to sell it, but delivering it is sometimes typically proves to be very difficult. There's one question that I picked up here from the audience, which I want to pose to you, and it's particularly around gateways. So there's a specific question here that is asking, does Nedbank have their own gateway? If not, when are they having that into the market?
Okay. We don't have our own proprietary gateway. We partner with a lot of companies. We do have a Nedbank branded payment gateway, and we've got different options there. It is still partnered with a third party, but it is Nedbank branded, and you can get it from your Nedbank relationship manager or banker will be able to sell you these options. We've got different options in terms of the complexity that's involved, but our light product is generally what we would be looking at for most of the small businesses.
All right. Thank you. So you do say that it is there, it's branded, and I think you speak about Nedbank Lite as an option that bankers and relationship managers can sell to clients. All right. So thank you, Hannes. We then swiftly going to move on to our last panel speaker, who is Andrew Henwood, and Andrew has quite a very long bio. For a security expert, he has to showcase that he knows everything about security. But and I'm going to try and summarize it. But he's a seasoned information security expert with over 24 years of work experience, and working both locally and globally with some of the leading information security and cybersecurity related companies. He's a frequent public speaker, and also a very seasoned specialist in security frameworks, payments, payment security, and also around the issues of compliance with regards to implementation of security standards in payments. So Andrew is going to share with us the other side of the ecosystem, where how do I keep my websites and my store safe. So Andrew, I'm going to hand over to you in beautiful Cape Town to share with us your thoughts for this morning.
Great stuff, Mpho. Thank you very much for that introduction, and I do apologize about the length of my bio. I will certainly shorten that for the next one. It's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to Nedbank to present to you good folk. Unfortunately, I'm the guy they call the handbrake, so please do bear with me. The security guy, unfortunately, around cybersecurity is often viewed as the guy who makes things difficult for business. And I hope my presentation, look, I'm going to start off pretty hard and give you some of the harsh, stark realities of where we are around cybersecurity. But I really do want to encourage you to stick with me and bear with my thought process, and you will see there's some silver lining at the end of all this. And I've got some real practical tips, which I'm sure will be beneficial to you guys as you embark on your online journey, which I'm sure you've already started. So looking forward to doing that over the next couple of minutes. So as I mentioned, being the handbrake, I'm very conscious. Every organization I've spoken to and worked with in the past, as well as the ones I'm dealing with now, I implore on them that we need to appreciate that cybersecurity has to be a balancing act. It's no good me coming in or anyone in my profession coming in and stopping business from working. We absolutely have to understand that business needs to keep on going. We need to enable business, and we need to balance things out. And I do apologize in advance for my slightly left field humor, but I hope you appreciate my utterly mutastic cow, which is balancing on a telephone pole there with moose horns. But it's important to understand it's got to be a balancing act, cybersecurity. We are there to enable business, to protect business, to do things in a more secure fashion, not to inhibit it. And I really, as I take you through this, please do bear this in mind, that although things are quite dire out there, as things become, as we all become more connected, as processes become more complex, we do appreciate that we need to keep the wheels turning in terms of business, especially in these challenging times at the moment. So leading on to that, it's pretty obvious that as we go more online, and I reflect back to Hannes's last slide with all the foundational building blocks there, we're operating in a fairly complex, in fact, it's not fairly complex, it's becoming an increasingly complex environment. There are many building blocks that go into producing an e-commerce channel. And I hate to say, we're also seeing a plethora of increased number of third parties who become involved and engaged, who specialize in all of those different areas that Hannes mentioned. And I'll mention some of these in a short while. And I think the challenging bit here is that those third parties you may be using, I'm talking guys like your cloud provider, your web developer, your the guy who does your search engine optimization, the folks who potentially do the infrastructure, the IT infrastructure within your offices, all the way down to your cleaning staff. You may be contracting in a third-party cleaning company. All of these folks can influence the security, the information security or cybersecurity of your service. And what I'm seeing a lot of is many of those third parties themselves are outsourcing functions to other third parties. So you may well find that your third-party search engine optimization specialist is actually contracting in another third party who's actually delivering services on behalf of them. And even worse, I've even seen this chaining down to a fifth level. So, not only do we have to worry about the third parties, but we've got to worry about who those guys are then outsourcing to themselves. And my message here really is I implore you to ensure that your third, fourth, or fifth parties appreciate the impact that they can have on your security. Now, what I'm meaning by that is if you engage with a third party, and I have no doubt that you will be engaging or have engaged with third parties, ensure that they are taking recognition and cognizance of the fact that they are very much can influence your security. So really go through the contract, go through the service deliverable that these folks are providing to you, and ensure that they're incorporating cybersecurity into their service deliverable. Trust me when I say a third-party web developer, they're very good at getting your site up and running fairly quickly. It always takes longer than you think, I do hate to say. But when it's finally launched, what I've seen is that typically security is thought of last. Great, we've got your website up. If you then ask them about, is it secure? Suddenly there's now a whole range of additional things that need to be done. So really look at making sure that your third parties incorporate cybersecurity into the deliverable that they offer. Put it into the contract. Make them responsible and contractually responsible that it's literally part of the deliverable. A quick example here, and Hannes mentioned these guys. I'm just giving you a quick example. Here's Amazon Web Services. Now, this is the landing page for Amazon Web Services when you go into to fire up something within the cloud. And I'm not picking on Amazon. I'm just showing you this is your landing page, and mark my words, this is not a simple process. You can see each one of these items here do various different things, and I almost guarantee, unless you have a lot of time on your hands, you're going to be using a third party who provides the understanding and the building blocks for Amazon Web Services. So again, if you're using an AWS provider, make sure they take cognizance and recognize and understand how to deploy AWS services securely. Hannes also mentioned WordPress. WordPress is a development framework for building websites. It's one of the more well-known frameworks. And again, you can see it's not simple. Yes, there are aspects, and I think Hannes is a smart guy, and he was able to get his website spun up fairly quickly. But if you want to do it properly, all due respect to Hannes, I've seen what some of his artwork and marketing skills look like. I think he should have gone with a professional. But again, that professional hopefully will understand the complexity and understand all those menu items on the left-hand side there of that system, and do it, again, as I say, hopefully in a secure fashion. cPanel is another example of a hosting package which allows you to control your hosting, whether it's a virtual hosting package or dedicated hosting where you host your website. Again, each one of these little items within here are little complex areas within its own right. You need email accounts. You need those email accounts set up correctly. You need databases. You need your site published. You need to manage files, etc., etc. All of this increases the complexity, which can very easily increase the risk. In fact, will increase the risk. So make sure any third party you're using understands how to do this all securely. So with all this increased complexity and increased connectivity we're seeing, I hate to say there are some realities out there we need to face. And I'm sure all of you are appreciative that almost every day we're opening up the newspaper, invariably online these days, and we're seeing some new big data breach which has occurred. And I really do want to stress this. I'm not at all picking on these organizations. I'm using them as illustrative examples. And one of my favorite catchphrases is, a cyber incident, which could lead to a breach of sensitive information. It's not a matter of if it's going to happen to you. If you're working in the connected world, it will happen to you at some point in time. Invariably, whether that's yourself that suffers an incident or a third party which influences your security, mark my words, the environments are so complex now that it will occur to you at some point. And I appreciate, most of these organizations here were actually very open about the incidents that occurred, and there were some good lessons learned and takeaways we can take from them. So Omnia, a large chemicals company here in South Africa, or actually a global company, was hit by ransomware in March of 2020. I'm sure you heard about this one during the lockdown and COVID issues. Life Hospitals, fairly major hospital group here, was extensively hit by ransomware. This was fairly recent in June of this year. Pretty catastrophic, this one. Not that I'm aware of any lives actually being lost, but it does make one nervous that hospital systems are also susceptible to this. And again, not because they're specifically vulnerable, but because they are all connected and they are complex. No matter what we're doing, there's a lot of complexity involved, which leads to potential issues. Another medical type issue which raised its head here, Logbox in South Africa, a medical aid aggregator, great little service. Unfortunately, these guys had a bit of an issue early July. Again, the worrisome thing here is that this was medical data which was compromised, which is really not great. And the big one that's on making headlines at the moment is Garmin. Some of you may well remember the Garmin South Africa website was actually compromised, had a bit of an issue, I think about a year ago. And now this was Garmin globally, which was hit by a significant ransomware attack. Again, pretty worrying because a lot of fitness and health data was and I'm a Garmin user myself. My data is sitting up in the Garmin's websites, and who knows what's happened to it at the moment. Good news, Garmin is recovering, and again, I think as things evolve, we will see some meaningful information which is useful for us to try and mitigate risk moving forward, coming out of these significant issues. So having said that, what I'm seeing a lot of at the moment is business email compromises. So we are seeing a surge in hackers breaking into business email systems, lying dormant there. I'll talk about that in a short while. And by compromising the email systems, they sit there waiting for invoices, for things that look like payments are going to be made. And what they do is they inject themselves into the communication stream and amend the invoices so that any payments get paid to their own accounts. And this is really not a good situation, because you can imagine the bad things that can happen. Once the cash goes into someone else's account, it's very difficult to recover, and it's very difficult to detect what's actually going on in these situations. And there's some pretty big, scary numbers. This is not localized to South Africa. This is a global problem. And a more recent stat I read just before this session is the latest US FBI stat is just under $2 billion was lost in 2019 just from business email compromises, which is pretty significant. The worrying thing across all these breaches is that we're seeing that the hackers, the dwell time that the hackers are in the systems is upwards of 100 days. And this is an average figure, because no one has the absolute gospel truth here. But on average, the hackers are in the systems for almost 100 days before they get detected, before an entity realizes that they've got an issue. And unfortunately, what we are seeing is that the hackers are getting a lot better at monetizing the data that they're extracting. They're realizing that if they can get into a system and they can extract stuff, they've worked out the best route to make money out of that exfiltration. And that trend is very prevalent in ransomware at the moment. You can see what's happening in most cases is that if an entity gets ransomwared, the data is being compromised, but not only are they just encrypting it like they were doing in the old days, but they're extracting and stealing that data and threatening to make it public if the subject doesn't make the payment, the ransomware payment. So really not a good situation where the guys are realizing how to really industrialize this. Now listen, I've given you a lot of gloom and doom, and I really don't want it all to be about doom and gloom. And I think at this point, I'm going to pause and say, let's have a little timeout. And what I'm going to suggest during our timeout is we just reflect on this lovely lady who is throwing spaghetti in a forest. And I think it's a great point to maybe bring an Impo to, maybe, have you got any questions, Impo?
Yeah, so I'm just thinking as a runner, the example you used with Garmin. I mean, I follow a lot of runners within the social media space, and you can understand the impact of ransomware and actually how it affects people's daily lives. So most of us are so used to uploading our training statistics, checking how we're doing, comparing with others how they're doing, to then go through a 36 to 48 to 72 hour period where the whole of the Garmin network was unavailable. Just shows you how important it is, both small and large businesses, to ensure that they are well protected and they take all the necessary precautions to protect their businesses. Now, you think about we bring it a bit home, and I think for me what gives me comfort is that in the context of payments, what as a payments industry we've endeavored to do over the years is we've continuously introduced security protocols that ensure that not only cardholder data is protected, but also advise merchants to ensure that their own websites are protected, like in this example. So, things like 3D secure tokenization, which is mandatory for any of our enablements that we do for websites to start trading, are those types of tools that we use to protect merchants. But that doesn't mean that merchants mustn't do what you are suggesting, which is beyond that, make sure that the website, all of the other third parties you're using are well vested in security. Because for me, it's nothing different from securing your physical store. You put the electric fence, you put the codes, and all of those things. You need to do the same for a virtual store. So it's more of a thought as opposed to a question. And I'll also ask Gabriel and Hannes from what their thoughts or questions do they have for you with regards to, as we time out. Hannes, do you maybe have some thoughts around security?
I think the biggest takeout from Andrew's presentation so far is basically to say, well, if it can happen to all of the big guys, it can happen to the small guys. It's nobody is safe. That's the biggest challenge that we face in the e-commerce environment. and but there are lots of tools to assist, and people like Andrew to help as well.
Yeah. And I think if you look at some of the fraud statistics, you're still seeing a lot of fraud in the physical world, and I guess it's a volume-based thing versus the e-commerce world.
Yeah, so with the introduction in South Africa of chip cards, we've seen fraud move from physical environment to what we would call the card not present environment.
Yeah.
And that's definitely on the increase. We've got an organization in South Africa called SABRIC, who provides statistics on this on a monthly basis, and we're not seeing a decline in fraud.
Yeah. Got it. Mm-hmm. Gabriel?
Yes. Yeah, so Andrew, I think from my side, this is good. Thank you very much for the insights. But I want to ask you, especially for the smaller businesses, do you think? I guess we can all agree that it revolves around trust, right? And I think that trust probably translates into the service provider that you use, the bank that you're with, and the environment that you operate in. What would you recommend for the smaller business owners that are keen to, set themselves up online across channels in terms of making sure that they choose the right partner and that they do have an environment that is secure and that conform to the security standards as per payment security industry?
Gabriel, listen, you're actually stealing my next couple of slides from me when I go through and answer that. But listen, you're absolutely spot on. And what I really want to emphasize, going back at the comments that Hannes made and Mpo now, I want to stress I'm not trying to scare you. Well, I am trying to scare you just to recognize that there is risk out there. And that risk can absolutely be managed if we work together and we ensure that all of the parties that are involved in this, I for one know that MasterCard and Nedbank are very, very big on security and will offer that support to organizations around securing their environments. The last thing any wants is any of our e-commerce merchants to be compromised, or your e-commerce merchants to be compromised. And there is a plethora of advice, which I will take you through very shortly, which a small e-commerce merchant can actually go through. But the important thing to understand here is, where I see this going, hopefully, my vision is when I retire eventually, is that cybersecurity doesn't become an afterthought. It becomes part and parcel of everything we're doing. And my favorite analogy is if you're building a building these days, you don't just go and build the building 25 stories high. And once you've built it, you don't then go to the structural engineer and say, listen, is that foundation strong enough? Is it going to be stable when there's like a storm that comes through? You don't do that after you've built the building. What you do is you do the plans up front. You make sure that your contractors you're getting in to build that building understand the structural requirements. You have a report done to build the foundations correctly from the get-go. And that's what you'll see. I'll talk about something about baking security in. And that's where choose your partners carefully. And make sure your partners understand how to do all the stuff securely. So, Gabriel, very simply, I don't think this is difficult as long as the partners you engage with are embracing security and walking that journey with you.
Andrew, there's a client of ours, Warren Boss, I think he's asked, talking about the foundation. What is an SSL certificate?
I tell you what, can I park that question? Let me get through the presentation, and we'll take that one at the end, because I am conscious of time.
Yeah.
Perfect. But SSL is absolutely great question. One of the building blocks, and I'll actually bring it in at in my last slide.
Cool.
Good stuff. All right, let's crack on then, should we? Okay, so as I said, guys, it's not doom and gloom. The good news is that the sophistication of the attacks that we're seeing is not increasing. Yes, we do read the horror stories where Chinese nation states and spies are coming in and hacking things like there's no tomorrow, like acting like James Bond, but that is not the norm. The bulk of the attacks, especially the ones I mentioned before, are typically perpetrated through simple mechanisms. And very basic cybersecurity hygiene would have thwarted and mitigated those headlines that you saw a short while ago. So I really do want to stress this. the vast majority of the attacks can very easily be prevented. And that's a real key takeaway. So it's not doom and gloom, folks. And as I said, we talked in the break here, we are starting to see that vendors and services are including cybersecurity advice. They're including updates and patching. They're doing automated testing and alerting, and they're baking it into the services they provide, which is fantastic. That's what we want. I showed you an example of a WordPress dashboard a couple of slides back. The great news is they're now incorporating cybersecurity in here. So you can see in this example, this dashboard is actually telling me that my WordPress is up to date, but some of my plugins are not. So a great example there, prompting me to actually update and make sure that things stay current and patched, which mitigates my risk. And on top of that, there are a number of free tools you can incorporate as part of these building blocks. So if you're an e-commerce merchant and you're looking to go e-commerce, you're launching your e-commerce platform, if you're not using some of these products, Cloudflare is a commercial product, but they have an entire free offering. WordFence is also a commercial offering, but they have a huge WordPress security module which you can use for free. If you're using AWS in that big complex dashboard I showed you, they have something baked in there called Trusted Advisor. And the amount of people that I speak with and I work with who don't even know that you have a free security advisor within AWS astounds me. So the good thing is that these building blocks are available. And these ones particularly are actually available for free. On top of that, I know everyone loves free tools. A little shout out to the UK government. They've got a great facility. You can actually go and download and run cybersecurity training for your business for free. And I'm pretty sure you probably need to be a UK business, but it's open for all. And it's I checked the license. I do quote the license here, the Open Government License version 3. But you can go and run this, and you can run this course, and you can send this URL to all of your staff, and you can train them on being cybersecurity savvy. So making sure that they understand the implications of phishing emails. Don't click on links that you're not expecting. Things to look out for, which are great little tools. So some little practical takeaways I'm going to leave you with. Cybersecurity is all about the human element. Things are very complex, but the bad guys, the hackers, always try and exploit human nature. So if we can educate our folks out there and do security awareness training, we'll be in a far better position than we are at the moment. I said this before, if you can, bake in cybersecurity. That's what we need to do. I have no doubt you're working with third-party, fourth-party, fifth-party vendors. Make sure that they are doing things securely for you. Put it into the contract. Make them responsible. Identify your personal identifiable information. If you're an e-commerce merchant, you will probably be handling client data. Not only client data, but their credit cards and debit cards, their addresses that they're delivering to, their shopping habits. Know where that data is. Identify where it is. And if you don't need it, once you process the transaction, delete it. And if you do need it, then please, by all means, protect it. I always say you can't protect something if you don't know where it is. So really make sure that you understand as a building block where your sensitive data is, your sensitive client data, so that you can protect it. I lived in London for 13 years, and we practiced fire alarms once a month. That was what we did. We never, touch wood, had a fire, but if we did, I can tell you we knew exactly what to do. So I really implore you, practice your incident responses. You will at some point experience an incident. It's the harsh reality of where we are. Know what to do if you have an incident. Who do I call at Nedbank? Nedbank have a whole fraud team that can assist you. MasterCard have a response team that you could call on. So understand what you need to do if you have an incident, because it'll ensure that you're far more well prepared. Backups. Absolutely crucial to have backups. If you've put all this effort into an e-commerce website, it's looking great, it's working tremendously, you've launched, you've search engine optimized it, and you then get hacked and hit by ransomware and they encrypt everything. If you don't have a backup, you'll have to restart. And most importantly, when you do backups, make sure that the backups work. Test the backups. The amount of organizations I've gone into to try and help where, yes, we thought we had a backup. When we tried to restore it, we realized it wasn't actually working. So really make sure that those backups are working. And lastly, I'm going to leave you with this last little slide just saying, work with trusted suppliers. Work with folks who embrace and understand cybersecurity. It is a complicated area because the world we're living in is becoming more complicated. We're becoming more connected. People are becoming more technology savvy. But our information is being spread far and wide, and we need to make sure that all of us are taking the right steps to protect ourselves and our partners and the folks we're working with. So there's no folks I'd more recommend than obviously working with the guys at Nedbank and or MasterCard. These are the guys who get it, and they are the ones driving these communication sessions like we're having today. So that's me done in a nutshell. Mpo, have we got 2 minutes and I can quickly just talk about SSL?
Yes, we do. So you can start with that, and then I think there's a follow-up question I want to pick up with you.
Great stuff. Excellent. So we had a question about SSL. SSL stands for Secure Sockets Layer, and that is a mechanism that ensures that your website, the traffic is encrypted from me as a potential customer browsing a website, and SSL encrypts the data that's traveling between me as the consumer to the website and back again. So if you are, obviously we're talking about e-commerce here, if you're running an e-commerce site, you categorically must have an SSL certificate. And that SSL certificate means that any communications that we make, for example, me entering my credit or debit card details to that website, the details are encrypted in transit between us so that no one sitting in the middle can eavesdrop and steal those credentials. The important thing, though, and I really want to stress this, SSL is absolutely a necessity. If you're doing e-commerce, you must have an SSL certificate, and your hosting provider will help you purchase one of those and get it installed, or your developers will help you do that. The unfortunate side I often see, people think SSL certificates is all you need to do around cybersecurity. And I often see this on a website. We're an e-commerce site, we've got SSL certificates, therefore we're completely secure. Unfortunately, SSL only protects the transmission of data, of sensitive data, between me as a consumer browsing the website and the website itself. It says nothing about whether that data is secured when it sits on the website itself, if it gets stored there, if it's put into a database. So please do appreciate, yes, SSL is absolutely mandatory, and I would highly recommend you do it. In fact, you will actually lose search engine optimization points. You will go down the ranking. But please understand it's not the silver bullet that many people think SSL is.
Yeah, and thanks for that. And I think this other one is more, I guess, a clarification, because it's a question raised here, and it talks about that, and it's from Leboang Bahulu. He speaks about the fact that he's read that firewalls, antiviruses, and the likes are not effective tools as security measures. And I guess what you're saying here is that, yes, if you look at each tool in isolation, it's an individual tool. You actually need to have a package of multiple tools to secure your site. Am I reading that correct?
You're absolutely right. We talk about cybersecurity being many layers of security. There's no silver bullet. If you've got antivirus installed, make sure it's patched. Make sure it's working properly. Yeah. That's one of the biggest problems we find is guys say, oh, my antivirus didn't help me. I got ransomware. Yeah. But when you go and analyze and look at this in detail, it turns out that the antivirus wasn't kept up to date. Yeah. Or even worse, I've seen many cases where antivirus detected the virus, but no one was looking at the alerts. Yeah. So you must think of cybersecurity as being a holistic, a multi-layered approach. Okay. So we need to make sure that each of those layers are effective. So absolutely, antivirus is something you must have in place. Yeah. You should have malware installed on your websites and on your e-commerce sites. but someone needs to be looking at those alerts. It's no good having an alarm system around your house if it's a silent alarm and no one's listening if it's going off. And you may as well not have that in the first place.
All right, thank you. So I think at this moment I'll bring back Gabriel and Hannes. I mean, if we were in a physical or pre-COVID world, this would have been a nice panel discussion across couches, and we would have been engaging on a face-to-face basis. So we are also adapting, so we're doing this digitally. So, Gabs, the question I want to pose to you, it's something that was raised a bit earlier, and it talks to the business-to-business space. Are you seeing a trend in there where business-to-business payments, which were traditional EFT, are also now being forced to move into the e-commerce space?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Paul. I think that what we've seen so far this year is that, certainly what was interesting, if you think about it, retail sales in South Africa in April on a year-on-year basis was down 50%, right? Yeah. And due to the lockdown, I think many of the traditional distribution capabilities in the country was compromised, and some fundamentally so. And it was exacerbated in South Africa by a further block on e-commerce initially, if you'll recall. But I think that from a regional perspective, the trend is that, some of those old vertical distribution chains, if you want, is disappearing. And at the back of that is driving some renewed vigor, if you want, for people that was higher up in the distribution chain to interact directly with consumers, but also new business-to-business requirements. So I think that from an SME perspective, what we've seen in market is a great increase in the way that small businesses now collaborate with each other, right? So and the commerce that is affected there. But I think equally what we're seeing is we're starting to see people that traditionally would not sell into the consumer base suddenly having a presence online and advertising and promoting their goods through Facebook. And I think that's things like fresh produce, for example, which is interesting to me, suddenly is available where farmers directly sell into the consumer base. And to tie into what Andrew said a little bit earlier, that just makes the management of the data and the enablement of the payment systems in that environment that much more important. But I think what it also does is that it brings a new dimension into the way that we think about commerce, right? So it's fine if we think about commerce in terms of browser checkout on a web page, but how do I go about it if I want to affect payment through WhatsApp, or if I'm engaging with customers on Facebook and I need to affect payment within that type of environment? How do you build trust there? Yeah.
Okay. And Hannes, I think an interesting one for you, it's around the informal markets and what is traditionally referred to as informal markets, or the township market economy. What e-commerce solutions do we, see as a key player in that space, and obviously take into account the cost effectiveness?
Thank you for that one.
Yeah.
I think informal markets, you are still going to battle with logistics.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing, what we would encourage, especially in the face-to-face environment, is the use of QR codes. And Gabriel alluded to QR codes earlier in his presentation, and it is a new solution. It runs on the e-commerce rails, but it is something for merchants to be able to sell easily.
Yeah.
Cheaply. There's no monthly costs in terms of having a QR code. There's just the transactional fees that the merchants pay. And there are various solutions out there. We've partnered with MasterCard on the MasterPass solution, and we sell that actively in the market. So if we are talking informal markets, running a website might not always be practical, but I've seen people start using WhatsApp. And along with WhatsApp, a QR code can be used to make a payment. In theory, you can send a picture of a QR code to somebody and they can use that to pay.
And I guess the solution like Tap on Phone also, as it rolls out, will give that opportunity.
Yeah, that's fairly new.
Yeah.
It's a new solution that Nedbank's developed. Early days, but it gives you the ability to use your cell phone, and at this stage only Android cell phones, to be able to accept card payments in terms of contactless or tap payments on your phone.
Okay.
So there's a multitude of solutions out there. Whether you're in face-to-face or non-face-to-face environment, I think we've got the solutions to support your business.
Okay. And I guess to the rest of the panel, there's a couple of questions that have been asked around cryptocurrency acceptance. And I mean, I'm not going to I'll direct it to all of you to just your thoughts on crypto. If it's something that will ever come to reality as a form factor for payments, and the roadmap leading up to that. So maybe, Andrew, you can pick it up first, and then Gabs concluding with Hannes.
Look, crypto is always, we could speak probably 2 hours on this topic. Crypto is here to stay. I think it's unequivocal that, it's not going away anytime soon. I think we have yet to see the inflection point where it becomes ubiquitous, where we can, at the moment, I cannot go down to the local Pick and Pay or ShopRite and pay using a Bitcoin at this point in time. Certainly not easily, unless I'm a sort of a pretty technology savvy person wanting to try and do something with. I think there's some debit and credit cards available from MasterCard, if I'm not mistaken. So, but Gabriel, you can probably talk about that. But I think, look, crypto is here to stay. We know it's inherently based on the blockchain. It's there's great security around it from that perspective. I think the big danger is it's still pretty complex. And if anyone's played with crypto, securing your private keys is inherently challenging. And I always get very nervous. If we're struggling to even protect our e-commerce websites, now we've got to worry about protecting our private keys, which are very valuable if you're storing a lot of information or a lot of value in your crypto store. It's inherently dangerous. So I would be very cautious and careful in going too far down the crypto route until guys like Nedbank kind of bring out a holistic solution which is going to make it easier and safer for us all to use.
Gabriel?
Yeah, look, I mean, I certainly agree with Andrew. I think it's still early days. I know that from a MasterCard point of view, we're taking crypto fairly seriously. We've got our own investments, and our MasterCard Labs team are working on crypto solutions. And I think that we're working with governments around the world to think through the implications of crypto and how that ties back into fiat currency and how that ultimately affects commerce. But yeah, I think it's early days, and I think that we need to ensure that all of the aspects across the payments value chain is taken care of, which I think is necessary before we would see a large scaling of crypto in general. Yeah.
Yeah, in my view, there's to echo what Gabriel has said. In terms of regulations, if I'm wearing my bank hat, the regulatory impacts of crypto still need to be understood. The regulators are still trying to get their heads around it. Personally, I believe crypto is too expensive. It's too volatile, and if you are exchanging value in the crypto market, you are losing a lot of money because everybody in that value chain takes a bite of their commission or takes a form of commission. Yeah. So as a merchant, to accept cryptocurrency is going to cost you a lot of money.
Okay. And I think that makes sense. I guess the other piece I want to pose to you, Hannes, is around, we've spoken a lot around e-commerce acceptance, and it had a card flavor to it. Some of the questions being posed here is what other payment rails can a merchant make available on their e-commerce sites?
There's a multitude of payment options, and in the e-commerce environment, you want as many options to accept payment. Because if you've done the hard yards to get somebody to make the purchasing decision, you don't really want them to then drop off because you don't support their payment method. So there's a multitude of card brands out there. The most prevalent ones in South Africa is MasterCard, Visa, American Express, and Diners. So you would want to accept those at a minimum. Most of the payment gateways do provide EFT-type solutions. as banks, we call this screen scrapers. The EFT providers don't like us calling it that. But there's a lot of movement in the EFT space, and in the industry there's initiatives around rapid payments, but that's still a couple of years down the line. There's credit providers that are offering payment solutions at checkout. There's there's loyalty solutions that you can use. I know Edgar's, in some websites you can use your Edgar's card to pay. So there's definitely a multitude of payment options out there. And most of the payment gateways, or the well-established payment gateways in South Africa, have the ability to either partner with some of these providers or offer these solutions themselves.
So in summary is, yes, you must accept all of the cards that are well known, but on top of that, you need to accept, make provision for EFT payments, make provision for loans at checkout, which is some of the key products that are made available there, loyalty, as in the multiple loyalty brands, and any other value store that consumers can utilize. And I think you made a valid point in that what we've learned with e-commerce is that it takes a lot, and a lot of you on the line, you probably have gone through this process, that for a consumer to eventually get to that checkout page, they've gone through a lot of effort. What you don't want to end up having is to losing them at that point of checkout. So think of it in the physical store world, where somebody walks in, fills up their basket, they get to the till, they leave the basket and walk out. And you have 10 people doing that every day. It is quite time consuming. So the next question that I want to pose, again, it's a consolidation of a number of questions that have come through. And maybe, Gabriel, you're probably not the expert, but you probably have engaged a lot of experts around how do I ensure visibility of my website, my e-commerce store. And Hannes covered a little bit of that in his presentation. But based on your, global knowledge, how do you ensure visibility of a website or e-commerce store?
Yeah, no, important. Visibility is very important, right? I mean, it's what Andrew touched on as well, and I think that these days it is increasingly important not just to think through how you utilize things like web optimizers and make sure that you pop up in the right way in search results. I think that equally important now is the online narrative and your online engagement across the different social platforms. And as we live in a world of COVID where our face-to-face interactions are diminished, and especially within the SME space, I think it's massively important to understand how you interact with your consumers and have that razor-sharp focus to give the information that is applicable to the specific audience that you're trying to reach. And to this end, then, if you think about the interactions that small business have on Facebook and what the type of responses are that you get on Twitter and some of the vitriol sometimes that goes along with these social messaging platforms, it's massively important to own your message, right? So the ratings that you get online matters. When somebody writes something about you on Hello Peter, you need to respond to it. If you pick up that there's issues on Twitter, you need to address it immediately. I think the platform business has showed us the way. If you think about the success of Airbnb, and even in a way that the social contract is signed between the lesser in an Airbnb situation and somebody that then goes and hires that particular place. And the same is true for Uber. Uber is as strong as the social compact between the drivers and ultimately the consumers. And it really boils down to communication. I think the silver lining or the thread in there that is important for the merchant community to realize is that you can only have the relevant conversations as long as you've got the right data that informs you who your audience is and what you need to be talking to them about. And I think that ultimately informs it.
No, and thank you for that. And I think it's good clarification in that you have to take advantage of the social media. You have to engage consumers. And I think in this space, engaging, responding, and keeping consistent service levels to consumers is quite important, because that word of mouth is what will either, put your business to the top or really drag your business to the bottom. So I'm looking at time, and I can't believe that we've already gone through the allocated time that we've set for ourselves. But gentlemen, I really want to thank you for taking this morning to share some of your key insights with our clients and the broader community at large. And there were a lot of questions around availability of this broadcast. Yes, we'll make it available post the session, and the details will be shared with you. But yeah, if before I close out, any parting thoughts, comments?
Thank you, Mpho. No, I think this was quite interesting, having this conversation. I think it's such a broad topic. There's a lot of information out there, and there's a lot of information that still can be shared, and we've got at limited time. So we welcome any questions and any interactions that we can have to explore opportunities.
Gentlemen, any parting shots? Andrew?
I'll leave you with, I hope I've made you think around cybersecurity. I implore you to ensure your vendors and your third parties you're engaging with also recognize that fact.
Yeah.
And I'll link it to Gabriel's last comments there, just around engaging with your audience and ensuring where you and how you communicate with your audience. We're all going to have an issue at some point in time. So understanding how to handle that situation. I don't think people have done a great job, certainly the guys in the headlines recently. And I think, this is not an embarrassing thing. Stuff happens, and we just need to we need to recognize the fact that it could happen to us. And, let's get on with our business and, make sure that you continue seeing exponential growth in e-commerce in a secure fashion.
Thank you, Andrew. Gabriel, anything else? Or?
Yeah, no, from my side, I thank you for this opportunity, Mpho. It's always great to collaborate. I think, the e-commerce space is becoming increasingly important, and I think that we are hugely sensitive to the challenges out there that the broader merchant community face. And for us, I think we're looking forward to partner with you and ultimately to partner with the merchant community to help extend the channels for payments as far and as wide as possible.
All right, so thank you, everyone. I think, as Hannes has said, the topic is quite broad, this payments acceptance topic. So I believe this is the first of many. So we will probably communicate with you on our next session and covering the next topic within this payments ecosystem. So thank you very much, and have a good day further. Thank you.